and welcome to Books Unbound, the podcast where we unbind books to get to their hearts. But today, we listen to your problems and we try our very best to help. Damn it.
Yep.
We'll try. Will we help? We'll see.
Who knows?
Are you excited, Raylene?
I'm so hyped. I love doing these. It's nice to just take a little brain break from thinking about reading and just kind of use our, both of us have been reading a long time, so I feel like we've got good tips.
Yes.
I feel like we've got something here.
You're right. We have been dealing with the ins and outs and intricacies of the reading life for a very long time. So being able to hopefully help out our fellow readers is pretty nice. If you didn't hear our first episode, the concept for these episodes is very simple. We have listeners of the podcast send us their voice clips of the problems they're facing, and we try and help them out. A little bit of an agony aunt situation, as they call it.
Dear Sugar action.
Dear Sugar, that's right. We just want to secretly and not so secretly be Cheryl Strayed.
And I like to secretly call this Dear Ruben. It's not the official name, but I do like it. I like it. Just sounds pretty nice.
All right. Well, our first message that we are going to listen to is from Annalise, who is having a little problem.
Hi, Books Unbound. This is Annalise. I'm very excited for this new segment, and I'm here to share my book confession. My bookish confession is that I use Goodreads to vet books that I know nothing about. So, whenever I go used book shopping, I'm always searching for obscure book titles, books I've never heard of, and although I'm willing to take a chance on them, I do look them up on Goodreads to see what their rating is. And usually if the rating is below a 3.7, I rarely end up buying it. I know this is bad, but I was just wondering what your advice is to vet obscure books, and if you think Goodreads ratings are any accurate depiction of how good they are, and generally what your opinions are. So, thank you very much. Looking forward to hearing your advice.
Alrighty, Annalise.
It's an interesting problem.
Is a very interesting problem. You're totally right. It made me laugh as well because I do this.
I do this too. And my mom is actually really bad for it too, because I don't have a specific number in my head like Annalise does, but my mom also does. I don't know what her number is, but she's like, ooh, it's under 3.8. It's probably not a good book. And I'm like, that's crazy. Like that. I mean, I do it. I also do it, but I also think it's crazy. And it's like I don't think it's the best way to judge books, because and my perfect example of this is sometimes the average ratings, sometimes they're very telling of whether or not a book is quote unquote good, but sometimes it might not be helpful for you specifically. And the examples I've come up with are 3 books that I've read this year that I really enjoyed that'll have really low ratings. So Astro Season, Beastly Season has an average rating of 3.4. The Factory, which I loved, has an average rating of 3.3.
What?
And Idle Burning also has an average of 3.3. So what I'm learning here is that these books don't work for a lot of people, which I understand. I totally understand that not a lot of people will like these types of books, but I love them. So I think that just looking at, if I were to just look at the average rating, I would have never picked those books up. And I would have been missing out big time. And I found just specifically a lot of Japanese translated fiction has low average ratings because a lot of North American readers just don't connect with it for some reason, or for reasons that do make sense. But there's a lot of kind of disconnect from those books. And so on average, they get quite low average ratings.
I actually looked up Convenience Store Woman because I remember this being the case with it. It's definitely higher than I remember it being. So I think it may have climbed. It's at 3.7 though. Okay. So it wouldn't have, I don't think that it would pass Annalise's test perhaps. It would be very much on the cusp. And it's surprising a book that I think is so genius is at a 3.7. And I think that you're right. the Japanese fiction that we tend to read is very unlike Western fiction. And so I think that you're totally right. Most people are picking it up and not enjoying it, but that doesn't mean that we loved those books.
Yeah, like love and we'll keep. I almost want to read books because they have low ratings now almost, because it's like, what if it's like a secret, like, really good book and people just don't get it?
I think that this is such a modern tragedy of it's like a computing tragedy. And I know that loads of people are thinking of the same thing I'm thinking of, which is the beginning of the Anthropocene Reviewed. So in the beginning of that book, John Green talks about this whole idea of rating stuff.
Right.
And how we're like the modern culture is obsessed with rating things, and that his job when he worked at Booklist magazine was to write these, like, I forget how many words it was, but it was something like 250 word reviews of the books that he read, so that they could do a lot of reviews in a published magazine. But as the books came out on, like, as websites happened, as the internet came along, how can a computer careen information from a text block? It couldn't. And even now, computers are very good at reading, but it's not as helpful or useful to them as numbers are. So we all started doing numbers to review things because it helps computers. But it's such a flimsy piece of information, because what does it actually tell you? So obviously you and I agree that this is a bad habit, but Annalise, we are not judging you, because we've both said we also do this.
Like, so many people
I think most people do this. But what do you think, when you actually sat down to be like, what advice should we give at Annalise? What kind of solutions did you come to?
Well, my main solution, I think, and Annalise also talks specifically about kind of like more obscure books, which I think also leads into
I wrote this down.
Yeah, that also,
she says she's searching for obscure titles and books I've never heard of.
Yeah, so I think the problem with that too is, if they are obscure and maybe less well known, less read, is that relying solely on the average rating can be even more dangerous in those situations, because say there's only 50 reviews. If there's like 3 of them that are 1 star or whatever, that's going to bring the average down so much more than on like a Brandon Sanderson book that's always going to be at 4.6 no matter what happens. And so I feel like it's dangerous because of that specifically. And so what I think I would advise is to actually read reviews and see what it is that people are saying, because that can be a lot more telling than the average rating. Because if you read something and it's very specifically like, oh, this is why I liked it, and you agree, like, oh, that sounds like something that I would also like. That sounds really interesting. I'll pick it up. Or if you read enough reviews that kind of tell you, oh, it has these issues, and if those are things that really bother you, then you can choose not to read the book. So I think reading reviews in this situation can be your best friend.
As opposed to also, just the number.
Yeah, exactly. I think looking at, it's sort of like the John Green thing you were saying, like, look at the words instead of the numbers, because in the words is going to be the more human kind of answer that you might be looking for and searching for and needing. So yeah, I think that's my advice. Read reviews instead.
That's good advice. I have 4 ideas.
Ooh, I love that.
So, number 1, have a quota for how many books a year you're allowed to buy that you aren't going to vet.
Ooh.
So I was thinking, like, why might Annalise have this pressure? Why do I have this pressure? And I think a big part of it is the money. Like, it's a factor here, right? You don't want to buy a book that is going to let you down, that you're not actually going to, that you're not going to like. And so you are risk averse, because I understand. Money, we're in a crisis. So I get that would be a good reason for trying to vet things and like double make sure that they're good. But I think it might be leading to this problem. So if you give yourself a quota, if you're like, I'm allowed to buy 3 books this year that I don't look up online, and if they suck, that's okay. It's part of this fun game that I'm playing with myself. I think it could remove the pressure for vetting.
Yeah.
And let you make that decision on your own and like base it on other factors. So that was my first idea. The second idea is sort of similar to this, but that maybe you should go to libraries for this kind of book hunting. as opposed to a bookshop, because obviously at a library everything's going to be free and the pressure is going to be way less on you to like not waste your money.
Yeah.
So if you're going to a bookshop and you're like, I'm not going to look at Goodreads while I'm at this if you're at a library, I'm not going to look at Goodreads today when I go to the library.
Just take a
I'm going
chance.
to walk around and take a chance, and I'm going to borrow 6 books and I'm going to take them home, and you start reading them and you don't like it. Okay, that's fine. You didn't waste your money. You used the library. The third idea I have is to look up your favorite obscure books, because you've specifically said that you're looking for obscure titles and books that you've never heard of. Mm-hmm. What I think might happen is exactly what you said, Raylene, that those books will have lower ratings.
Yeah.
And that might give you, this is basically the accept what you're doing, but adjust it slightly advice. This might give you a new lower number, because currently you are vetting at 3.7. If you realize that a lot of the obscure books that you like actually are consistently getting like 3.2s, maybe that should be your new number.
Yeah.
My final idea. And this is kind of how I've been combating this myself, because I don't like this behavior in myself either. I'm like, why am I allowing so many other people to be a part of this like beautiful, intimate book moment that I'm having? It's just me and the bookshop and the book. Why am I allowing all of these hundreds of people that I don't know anything about? I don't know what they like. I don't know what they read. I don't know anything about them.
They don't even know you.
No, they don't even know me really, and I'm taking their advice as gospel. It's ridiculous, actually, when you think about it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, why am I doing this? What can I do? What information am I looking for? And what I've realized, and it's very simple, but what I've realized really changes everything, is simply allowing time for reading a few pages of the book. And it's so funny how unbelievably useful this is.
Yeah.
Like, it's so simple. It's like, are we not even doing that? Are you not even reading the first few pages? But I don't think we mostly are. Like,
no,
when
I
you're in a
definitely
bookshop.
don't. I should.
Right?
I should, but I don't.
Yeah. But no, you're just like looking at the covers and the synopsis and like a lot of other data and information. But maybe the first few lines. But if you said to yourself, I'm only allowed to look at Goodreads after I've read 3 pages, I think that would actually change everything. I mean that. Like,
I think that's really good
after
advice.
3 pages, you will have the information that you need to be like, actually, I'm feeling the vibe. I don't care what Goodreads says. I think that this book is speaking to me. Or, I'm still pretty unsure. And then you look at Goodreads and it has a 2.9 and you're like, oh, yeah, no, I agree. But you've done a little bit more of that diving in with the book.
Yeah, I think what I want to say to kind of like backpack onto that and maybe finish this off is like trust your instincts, which I think like if you're reading a synopsis and it sounds like, wow, this is so good. And then you read those first few pages and you're like, wow, this is so good. Just don't even look at Goodreads, like just get the book anyway. Because when I think back to when we were kids and buying books and going to the library, we didn't have any kind of system to look at to back up. Is this a good book? Do people like this book? We would just pick them up based solely on our instincts and our interests. And I think that it would be really cool to go back to that, like to undigitize our brains a little bit.
God. You know what? I think we freaking nailed that.
I think this is going to help me, actually. I think we just advised ourselves.
I think I needed this.
I think so, too. Thank you, Annalise.
Thank you, Annalise.
My problem.
That was so much fun.
Awesome.
All right. Our next message comes from Marina.
Hello, Marina here. So I have an issue confession to make, and I really hope you can help me, because it's like, it's a very soul-crushing dilemma for me. So I have my small library, right? Which I have a lot of books I've read and that I didn't. But nevertheless, I select very, very well every book that I add to that library. So that means that, I care a lot about every book that's there. And at the same time, I have a lot of friends who enjoy my passion and who I invite and say books. And I really like recommending them books, right? From those that I've read, or maybe I know that they would like, even if I didn't read them. So, and often it happens that I give them the books from my shelves. Because, when a friend is visiting, you're really excited and you're giving them the book, go and read it. And then after some time, when they returned, or maybe not the book, or maybe when they returned it, not in a good state, I sort of regret. It's sort of a moral dilemma because I'm like, look, I love more people to read these books, but at the same time, these are my books. These are my babies. So what do I do about this? Am I a bad person? Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Marina, for this very worrying predicament.
I know, this made me really sad.
Yeah, it's a fascinating dilemma. I did write, for all of the messages, I wrote a couple of key quotations because I like to be able to refer, and Marina said that it's soul crushing.
Yeah, that honestly, it kind of made me laugh. I was like, oh, this is a really, really big problem for Marina. Yeah.
All right, start us off, Raylene. What do you think?
Okay, so yeah, this is obviously a problem that a lot of book lovers go through, lending books to people, and either they come back in bad condition or you don't get them back at all, which isn't even something Marina really touched on, but it's something that I've had to deal with and I'm currently dealing with. I lent a book out in like May and I'm still waiting to get it back. And it's a really important book to me, so I'm not going to stop.
Oh, no. Okay.
I'm like, you got to give that back. But what I think is something that you could possibly do is, because you have this like passion for recommending books, clearly. This is the reason you keep lending them out. I think maybe what you should do is every time you think of a book to recommend to a friend, either just tell them to go get it from the library or even buy it for them as a gift. Like that could be something you do for them, is you are constantly hunting for books that you want to recommend to your friends and your family members. And then you can just give it to them either for their birthday, for Christmas, or just for whatever. Because I think that in the end is going to be better off for you than giving out your copy that will then come back in a way potentially that makes you unhappy, makes you sad. You might have to then go rebuy the book anyway just to like, reclaim its proper condition. And so I feel like you can just skip a few steps and maybe just buy it for them. And then that's a nice gift. It's a nice thought. It's still like you're still thoughtfully recommending something to someone, but then you don't have to worry about the condition of your books. So yes. And you'd also ask the question, Marina, if you're a bad person for feeling this way. And I want to say no, definitely not. I think that it's very important to set boundaries. And a lot of people have problems setting boundaries, myself included. And I feel like you shouldn't feel like a bad person for setting boundaries. It's very important to do that. And so if you just be very clear with your friends that if you are lending them a book, like I really care about the condition of my books. They mean a lot to me, because some people don't care about keeping things in nice condition. Some people that just doesn't matter.
Yes.
And so if you're just more clear with them, maybe that it's important to you, then they'll either give it back to you in great condition, or if they wreck it, they'll hopefully know in their own minds, like, oh, I should replace it. I've definitely had that happen before with friends where they're like, oh, I kind of wrecked your book, so I bought you a new one.
I did that.
Yeah, exactly.
I destroyed your book.
Yeah.
And the second we realized it was destroyed, I was like, I am so sorry, Raylene. That is totally my fault, and I will buy you a new one. What edition do you want?
Exactly. Exactly. There has to be that understanding, I think.
Yes.
If you mess up someone's book, like, they might not know that, though. And so if you kind of have to make that clear, maybe before lending it out. Like, if you spill water all over this book, you're gonna have to replace it.
Yeah.
So
I think that's really good advice. I think what is important, I think that what I want to say to Marina, I mean, I have a couple things, but the main important thing is I think that you have to like have a mantra. And this is the mantra. When I loan a book to someone, I shouldn't expect it back.
Yeah.
I think that this is actually really important advice. I believe this is advice that is also like given out pretty normally for like loaning money to friends.
Yeah.
I've heard it said before, like if you loan money to your friend, ideally they're going to give it back. Like that is the plan. It's a loan. It's not a gift. But you shouldn't loan money thinking you will definitely get it back. You should go into it thinking, I might not get this money back. And it's a way for you to realize like, oh, actually, if I don't get this money back, I would be in a really bad financial situation. So I'm loaning too much, or actually I am not in a place where I can loan. In this case, I think it actually works the same way, where you're like, if I give this book and I'm having the expectation that I am not going to get this book back, and that makes me feel scared or bad or sad, then maybe you should not be loaning it out.
That's really good.
But then on the other hand, you might be loaning out a book and you're like, actually, if I never got that back, that's fine. Then you're like, okay, cool. You should loan it, right? It doesn't give you anxiety. So I think that might be a good litmus test to do every time.
Yeah. I wish that you had told me that advice before I loaned out this certain book that I really want back, because it's a book that I not only love, but I annotated, which I never do.
Oh, no.
So I can't even rebuy it. Like, I could, but then I would lose that first reading experience annotation. No. You know? So that's why I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give up.
No, you can't give up. This is one... You shouldn't give up, but maybe in future.
I know now that's a really good way to think about it. Like, I would never have lent it out if I had thought about it ahead of time like that. Like, oh, if I don't get it back, I'll be devastated. Okay,
I'm glad that makes sense, because if you like that idea, that means I explained it right.
It's perfect. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
But the other thing I was thinking was, like, I felt like these two really strong kind of facts emerge with Marina. Like, on the first hand, really emphasizing how much Marina likes giving recommendations, like kept mentioning that, like, she really enjoys giving recommendations to friends and recommending books to friends. So that's like one fact. But then the other fact was like how emotionally attached Marina is to her book. So it's like soul crushing. I care about every book that's in my library, she said. They're my babies, she said at one point.
She really loves her books, yeah.
So I'm like, okay, that's great. That's good. You love your books and you want to recommend books to friends. I think that there's a way to do this that is not loaning books. So here are a few quickie ideas that I had. Number 1, set up a library date with someone or a bookshop date with someone and just be like, oh my God, I think I have the perfect book that you would love. Would you want to go to a bookshop with me or a library with me? And we could try and find it. So they're getting it for themselves. Another idea that I had, this is kind of goofy, but I actually kind of am obsessed with this idea now. Go to your favorite bookshop or a local bookshop and buy a bunch of gift cards that are all like $5. Ooh. So it's like not a lot. It's just a little gift card. So it's not as expensive as buying someone an entire book.
Right.
But when you have the experience where you're like, oh, I wish I could loan this to someone, you say, hey, I really recommend this book. Here's $5 off of getting it. So it's really incentivizing them to get the book. It's like part of the thing about loaning someone a book, I think one of the reasons we want to do that is because it's free for them, right? You're not telling them That's have true. To go buy something, but this way you're giving them a big discount, but you're not having to buy them the whole book.
That's good.
You know what I mean?
I like that.
So I thought that was like kind of a weird, kooky idea. And then my final idea was be a link sender. Basically, like later on in the day, send them the link and be like, this was the book that I really thought you would like, and like literally send them the link. So you're like making it so easy for them to buy it for themselves. Because often that will be like the thing I'll just like have forgotten, and then a person follows up and they're like, did you read that book? That's a lot of pressure. But if you're just like, by the way, this was the book I mentioned, I'm like, oh yeah, I did want to look that up. And then I might look it up and go on my own adventure and decide to buy it myself.
There you go.
There we go.
All good advice. Wow.
Oh, Marina, I hope that you get your books back, whatever's out there in the world right now. So our next message comes from Maeva.
Hey Raylene, hey Ariel. My name is Maeva. Sorry for the accent, I'm French. Anyways, so I definitely am in a reading slump lately. Like, I can't seem to get around to picking up a book, like to read anything. And I even tried reading again my favorite book, which is The Secret History. And I'm loving it when I'm reading, but I can't seem to get it to pick up the book, right? I can't seem to read anything. So anyways, if you would have any advice on that would be amazing. And I just want to thank you for making this amazing podcast. It really has become part of my routine now, and I am absolutely loving it, and I cherish it very much. Anyways, thank you.
This might be like the one I relate to the most.
Yeah.
This is really interesting because it's not about not wanting to read. She wants to read, clearly. And it's not about not enjoying reading. She said that when she's reading, she's having a great time. But it's fitting it into the schedule that seems to be the crux of the problem.
Well, and not wanting to pick up the book necessarily, like not feeling like she wants to pick up a book, which, I was kind of, my answer is mainly just specifically for like being in a reading slump and not necessarily as specific as you're looking at it.
Okay.
And I've probably said this before, and I'm sure lots of people have said this before, but for me, the best advice I can give to someone who is in a reading slump or is having a hard time like picking books up is to just stop trying. Like, stop trying to force it.
Yeah.
Because, like, Maeva even said she's trying to read The Secret History, which is like her favorite book. And though she's enjoying it while she's reading it, she doesn't feel like picking it up. And that to me is like the key. Like, maybe you should just take a break and do something else. And I find that it always works for me. If I'm ever in a kind of reading slump, it can be over within a day or two if I just like stop trying. And I'm just like, I'm just going to go work on a craft project or go for a walk or watch a movie. Exactly. It's nice to just like cut yourself some slack. Like, you don't always have to be reading. Just because reading might be your favorite activity doesn't mean you have to do it every day. Yes. Or like you're still a reader, you know, you still love books. There's nothing wrong with that. You just take a little break. And I feel like it sometimes, for some reason, your brain just isn't in the right space or mood for reading. And I find that this often happens when I get stressed out. And it's funny because I love reading so much. You would think that, oh, I'm stressed out. If I read a favorite book, that would be something that would help me out. But that's the opposite of true. It's because reading does take up a lot of your brain space, I guess is one way to put it. Whereas watching a movie is easier. Like, it's more relaxing for you. So I find if my mind is too full with other things, reading just doesn't work. Like, I will be looking at the words and nothing is going into my brain because I have too much else on my mind. So I don't know if that's why Maeva's in a reading slump, but that's just my personal experience. So yeah, I do think that just kind of like taking a step back can sometimes be just what you need, especially if you have other hobbies that maybe you aren't pursuing as much because you spend a lot of time reading like me. It's nice to like give those hobbies some time as well. But I'll also say, once you are feeling like reading again, jumping back in with a favorite book is definitely a good way to go. Like, if you've got something you know you're going to love, it's going to be better for you in the end. Because if you take a break from reading and then come back and accidentally read something you don't like that could put you right back into a slump for all we know. So that's my second piece of advice is definitely like pick up a favorite if you're into rereading, which obviously Maeva is. So that's all I got.
I love it. I think that's great advice. And I actually like that it's quite different than the angle I've taken. Cool. We kind of are approaching this in two different ways, but I think that's kind of great because we're covering more ground.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, the way that I interpreted the problem was a bit more, like I said, of a scheduling nightmare. Because I think maybe I just really inserted myself into the situation. And what I find is I love reading, clearly. I love books and I want to be reading. I have so many things I want to read, etc. But figuring out when I'm actually going to read actually has to be a little bit active. It doesn't fall passively into my life. Because like if I didn't have the podcast, I do wonder how much I would read because the podcast adds a lot of pressure. It adds a lot of anxiety. That's a topic for a different day. I find that like I wouldn't probably read as much as I do because it doesn't naturally come to me in the way that it used to. That being said, I kind of have two pieces of advice because I do manage to read.
Yeah,
right. I do show up to the podcast with books read. So the first thing is lean in to the binge as opposed to the marathon.
Yeah.
Basically, the way that I read in this day and age, and I'm sure it'll change again, but how I currently read is in binges. So, like, I will read a book in 2 days, and then I won't read anything for a week. And then I'll read another book in a couple of days, and then I won't read. And this kind of does fit into what you were saying, Raylene, of, like, just go with the flow. Like, feel
do
the
what
flow
you want. Do whatever your brain is telling you to do. And if it's telling you, I don't feel like starting another book quite yet, then that's fine.
Yeah, because I find that I'm like, oh, right now I'm in a reading mood. I'm going to read a lot. And tomorrow and the next day and maybe the next day, I won't read at all. That's fine.
Okay, I have a question for you actually then. Do you ever get into reading slumps or do you not? Because that's just the way you read is kind of like naturally avoiding the slumps. I do. Or like you don't acknowledge them as slumps, which is good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm like above the slump. I am the slump. Yeah. No, yeah, I think you're right. I don't feel like I ever get into reading slumps because I just, when I'm like, oh my God, I'm not reading, I'm not thinking that way. I'm thinking like, oh yeah, I want to play a game. Like that's what I want to do. So I'm just like, I've just kind of accepted that I am into binge reading for a long time one day and then not for a couple of days. The other thing, though, that I actually really love as a concept and recommend to people is habit stacking. I don't know have you heard of that, really?
You've told me about it once, but I don't really remember what it means.
Yeah. So it's like really a really helpful concept of how to fit habits into your life by stacking habits that you want to introduce to your life to habits you already have. So an example of this is you probably brush your teeth every single day. Yeah. So in the evening, at a minimum, you are in your bathroom brushing your teeth. Well, that might be the perfect time to introduce like moisturizing your face. Right. Like if you're like, I want to moisturize my face, but I don't know when I'm supposed to do that. Do it at the same time as brushing your teeth. Like brush your teeth and now you also moisturize after that. And now you've stacked two habits together. Something you are reliably going to do. Now you're going to add a little other thing onto it. So for example, you probably always have lunch. During your lunch, add 10 minutes of reading.
Yeah.
Or if you always do exercise, add on some time of listening to an audiobook. Right. So basically finding something you already do semi-reliably and then adding a new habit to that. What that does is remove the massive problem of carving out time. Because that's like the big problem is where am I going to get this time that I currently don't have? Well, don't worry. You don't have to fit a whole schedule. You don't have to figure out a whole new schedule. You just have to add it on to something you're already doing. Yeah. And I think that this probably could be helpful. Like if you already have a cup of tea every night, add on 10 minutes of reading to that. And that snowballs. It really does. Because usually you want to then read for longer.
It's true. Once you actually get into it, then you almost want to then maybe like, oh, maybe I'll have my tea a little bit earlier tomorrow so that I can read more.
Exactly. Not too bad.
It's good advice.
All right, it's time for our next message, which comes from Han.
Hello from Australia. My bookish problem is essentially I want to know how to tactfully tell someone I don't want your book recommendation, and I never asked for it. Basically, I work in a library and part of the job is, of course, giving recommendations, but to people that asked for them. My problem is that I have, and I know you understand, I have so many books that I want to read already. Too many books. I will never get to them. Never. That I don't have the bandwidth, the space on my TBR to fit unsolicited book racks. It's gotten to the point where my colleagues are like leaving books on my desk saying, please read me, or like asking me a few weeks later, oh, you know that book I recommended? What did you think of it? I'm like, I didn't read it. I don't want it. I don't want it. Please help.
Okay, this problem got a little out of control, in my opinion, Raylene. When she said that her, like, colleagues are leaving notes on her desk that say, like, read me, that sounds like kind of like a horror novel beginning.
A little bit, yeah. So, okay, I'll start us off. So, this advice kind of goes back to my advice from earlier in the episode, which is you've got to set clear boundaries. Because otherwise this will keep happening. And it's unfortunate, but it is the way of the book reader. There are always going to be people out there who are trying to recommend books to you. And Julia, my friend, has this exact same problem. Her coworkers are constantly recommending her books. And they're not books that she wants to read. Like, Julia reads very like specific types of books, and people will be like, oh, you should read this like historical romance, and she's like, oh no, but she's too nice to say no. And so setting that boundary is so important. And just like, it's not rude to say, oh, well, maybe that's not exactly what I'm into reading, or what, like there's so many different ways you can say it. What I personally do, because I have kind of shut this down at work as well, there are so many people who are always trying to recommend me books. I just say, oh, like, I don't know if I'll ever get to that. I have 200 books at home that I already really want to read. Like, I have so many. So, like, I appreciate the recommendation, and I'll, like, log it in the back of my head. But, like, no, you don't need to lend it to me. People are often like, can I bring it? Like, I can bring it to you if you want to read it. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I don't want to read your John Grisham book. Like, I'm just not interested. But thank you so much. So, yeah, just having some kind of, like, very logical explanation that is a nice way to say, you know, I'm good. I think that's the way to do it, because as soon as you've set that boundary, people are more likely to either, you know, stop leaving creepy notes on your desk or just stop recommending you books entirely. Like, if that's really what you don't want, is you don't even want the recommendations, like, you can say that somehow. I don't know how.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a way to say that. I also wanted to give the advice of don't cave in, because I feel like there's so much pressure, and this often happens to Julia too, where she'll like end up reading the book that somebody like gave to her even though she didn't want to. And for me, that is hateful, because it's like I only have so much time. Like, as we've talked about with time and reading, like if you already have so many books that you want to read, that time is precious. And if you're taking time out of reading the books that you already really want to read a book that you have no interest in reading, you're doing yourself a disservice. And
it's true.
So I want to say don't cave in.
I really agree with that. I'm glad that you said that, because I hadn't written that down, but I think you're totally right.
I think you've got to put your foot down sometimes and stick to your guns is another thing I wrote down. You got to stay strong. Don't give in.
It's like a pep talk.
Yeah.
I find this really, really fascinating, because when I was listening to this message, I was like, oh, that's such a like specific problem. But now you're telling me you've had this problem. Yep. Julia has I think this might actually be widespread, and I just don't know that because I've never worked in an office.
You don't have coworkers. Yeah.
I've never had a coworker. You're sort of my coworker. That's kind of funny.
But I give nice recommendations. I only do it in a nice way.
Yeah, well, you only ever gift them to me.
That's true.
I can't really
complain.
I
forcibly give them to you. You have to keep them now.
I think that this is a real problem, and what I really do get it, because I am not looking for recommendations, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Like, I totally get why people might think that I'm looking for recommendations, but I am so attuned with what I want to read because I've already bought it, or because I already enjoy my way of finding books. And I'm really not like finding books is not my problem.
Yeah.
I have so many books. And it also, I do take recommendations, but from very specific sources. Like, if you tell me, Ariel, you really have to read this, I respect that. Like, that means a lot to me. Like, we have a friendship that I'm like, okay, that
and I understand what you like and what you're looking for. Like,
that's the other big part of it. I'm like,
that I will not recommend to you because I understand you.
Exactly. And that's the other huge part of it. I'm like, Raylene, actually, if you're recommending a book to me, you're the person who knows the most about my reading, honestly. Yeah. And now CJ, because he's listening to all of it as well. But yeah, so there are people that I take recs from, but that not everyone. Not everyone. And so I think that you're right. Like, I think that the real advice is try, and if there's a specific person who keeps doing this or whatever, just kind of be a little bit upfront. I don't think that it ever has to get rude. Like, I don't think there's we're not saying that, but I think there is a way to be a little more forceful of just saying, like, I'm so sorry. I really don't think that I can add that to my TBR right now. I have so many things I'm excited about. But thanks for the rec.
And maybe even you could even say, like, if I'm ever looking for a specific book recommendation, I'll let you know. Because I think that's the problem too, is people don't realize that if you're not asking for something, you might not want it.
Yes.
That's a big problem that I've seen just in the world. People love giving unsolicited advice. And sometimes I'm like, I didn't ask for that advice, so it made me angry that you just told me that. Like, I don't want to hear it. And so I feel like maybe putting that out there, like, I'll definitely ask if I'm looking for a book to read. That could be a helpful way to phrase it.
On the other hand, I did think of some lies that she could tell.
Perfect. This is the part that I didn't come up with. I know there's got to be something you can say. This is what we got you for.
First of all, I thought you could start saying, no matter what they recommend, just tell them you're not into that genre. So if they're like, you should check out this book by Stephen King, you're like, oh, thanks, I actually really don't like horror.
Yeah.
Even if you do, you just start fully lying about everything they recommend. You be really firm about hating that genre.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one.
Okay.
The second idea is say to them, I'm actually doing a really specific reading challenge this year.
That's a good one.
And I cannot deviate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, really hammer home that deviation is not possible.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you could do this next lie. This one is a little ridiculous, like pushing it way too far. But, like, try and somehow make it a big deal that you don't take recommendations from coworkers. Say to them,
that's crossing a line.
Yeah, exactly. Say to them something along the lines of, I really don't like to mix personal and professional life.
I love that because it makes no sense, really. But
well, it almost does, because they're librarians. She says she works in a library.
About that, yeah.
So just be like, sorry, my personal life and I really care about the distinction between my personal and private life.
Yeah.
Those were my ideas for lies you could tell, but I think you could start to get really wacky with these sorts of things.
Yeah, there's lots of things you could potentially say.
The final kind of idea I had was start writing really fun Post-it notes back to whoever the hell is leaving Post-it notes. Like you said, someone's like left books on your table that say, read me. I would then like put the exact book back on their desk with the sticky note that says, no.
I don't think I will.
Not today. Thanks so much. Ha 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 ha. Not today.
Maybe next time.
That kind of thing. That might be if you're feeling like you can't tell the truth.
Yeah, it is sounding like it's a little bit of a stressful situation over there.
I also think I wrote down Hannah's name as Hen, and on our spreadsheet it says Jordan. Yeah. So if I said the wrong name, we love you no matter what. And we did it for anonymity. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. No doubt.
No doubt. All right. Our final problem is, again, a problem of our modern times. Yep. This comes from Maggie.
Hello, Ariel and Raylene. I live on an island in Portugal, which means my book buying options are very, very limited. Lately, the few bookstores we have in here only stock English books that are hyped on TikTok, which personally for me is not just something I'm interested in reading because they skew very YA. I want those weird, almost nobody heard about books, but I also don't want to order them from Amazon. What do I do? Got any advice on worldwide shipping stores that are safe to order from? And how do I find more of these books if I can't browse them in store? Please share more of them on the podcast. Love the pod and have a great day.
All right, Raylene. There's a series of unfortunate events going on here, the biggest of which might be the island element.
Yeah, so that can be tricky, and I haven't dug into my suggestions too much, but here's what I've got. My first piece of advice is, I know it's not as fun, but maybe try getting into ebooks because you can get a lot.
I literally thought you were going to say maybe try getting into TikTok books.
No, I'm on the
if you
I'm
can't
in the same
beat
boat.
them, join them.
No, I'm in the same boat as Maggie. I'm just not really interested in that whole subgenre. Obviously there are a few books that are TikTok popular that I do love, like The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. There are going to be some that do transcend, they're popular for a reason, but I totally am in the same boat as Maggie. So no, my first piece of advice is to try getting into ebooks, because then
great idea.
You can read almost anything without having to worry about shipping, without having to worry about paying for them if you're able to get them from the library through Libby or whatever. So that's my first and easiest piece of advice. But I
actually think that that's genius. Yeah, because I didn't think about that, and I think that is huge. Yep.
But then my next piece of advice is that I found 2 places that you can buy books that ship internationally. Hopefully they will ship to your island. I'm not sure. But the first one I found is called World of Books, which is a UK-based used bookstore, online bookstore, I think. And it ships internationally, and they have a lot of good deals. That was something I noticed. There was a lot of books that were £3, £4, quite cheap. And Spence, you were also kind of specifically looking for maybe strange, unpopular books, or, just not the TikTok-y books. I did look up to see if they had convenience store woman, and they do. And they also have books by Hiroko Oyamada. So that was my judgment. I was like, if they have those, that's got to be pretty good. So that was the first one I found. And then the second one
That's so cool. Also, Raylene, I've got to say, I just looked up World of Books.
Yeah.
And they're really, really cool. It says World of Books is established by a group of dedicated book lovers with an ethos to do good. They're pioneers in the reuse and recycling of unwanted books. They're so cool. They're a certified B Corp.
Yeah. So I just found that, and I feel like I want to now check out, I want to maybe buy some books from them because they seem really cool. So this next one that I also found is called Better World Books, which those are almost the same name. Interesting. And this one is UK or US based, and they sell new and used books. But what was interesting is they do international shipping for free on orders over $15, which is a pretty low.
That's pretty low. That's
pretty
a low
bar. Yeah. The other cool thing is they have really cool categories. So just a few that I noted were banned books. They had a section on South Asian Heritage Month, and you can also sort by bargain bin There was tons. Like, so if you're just looking to browse and maybe discover books that you aren't seeing online as much, they have all these really cool things that you can kind of search by, and like they're just like grouped into lists. So it shows you what's in stock. Cool. And like, yeah, so I don't know too much about the company, so whatever, but it seems like a really cool type of setup and really what Maggie needs, I think.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Yeah. Well, great ideas. I'm with you. When I lived in Honduras, this was a really interesting problem that I encountered because the internet is there. And so obviously I was aware of a world of books that I then was not able to get in Honduras because it's just not... it's just not as a big of a culture there to have bookshops in the same way. I also don't like reading books in Spanish very much, so I was really limiting myself to wanting English books. Yeah. But even so, there wasn't very many bookshops that I could find books at, and the books that I found were like Twilight. So I think that's exactly the same problem that Maggie's running into. So I really, like, the second I heard the message, I was like, I've actually been there. Like, I know what you mean. And I mean, I only lived there for a year and a half, so it was different than, it sounds like, Maggie, you grew up on this island, but I'm sorry. That is tricky. I do think there are solutions, though. I think, like you said, Raylene, the idea of doing an e-reader is a really good idea. If possible, avoid Kindles because they just support Amazon. But I'm not sure what the options are in Europe for e-readers, actually. I'm sure there's something. So this was a really interesting problem. The book that the shop that I thought of was Daunt Books. They ship internationally. I have ordered books from them before, and they like package them really beautifully, like super beautifully. Which I think is really fun. The second idea that I had is really a bad idea.
Ooh, okay, do tell.
It's just kind of a dumb idea. But basically I was like, I am sure because European people get to use trains because you're all so lucky. So traveling within Europe is not a big deal like the way that it is here. And so I'm sure that you sometimes, maybe once a year, leave the island and go to another country. Like, so if you're able to once a year maybe go somewhere, I think that basically you should mentally justify for yourself that it is very reasonable for you to take an extra little suitcase or bag just to do a giant blowout when you're on a trip, because maybe it's not going to be possible for you to find books on your island, but when you go on a trip you might be able to find a bunch of books that you're really excited about. And I think that because of your specific living circumstance, I think you're so well justified to like buy a bunch of books on vacation and have extra room to bring them home with you.
Well, that's a crazy but good idea.
It's a kind of a wild idea and might not be possible. But even if it was just like once every few years, you got to go to like Paris or something where there's so many bookshops with a large selection everywhere, you might be able to do that. The other idea that I had was like kind of be the change you want to see in the world. So basically I was thinking like there's kind of two ideas here. The first one is, even if your bookshop doesn't have the types of books that you want, they probably can still order them for you. And they would probably love to order them for you. The reason that they're getting those TikTok books or whatever, like the Instagram books or the YouTube book, whatever, the reason they're getting those popular books is just because they think those are the ones that will sell. You can change that by showing them that you want to buy different types of books. So I wouldn't give up on your indie. I would still go there and I would just order them through there, which would be great. But then the other thing is, maybe this kind of doesn't help your problem, but maybe it sort of is like a nice outcome anyways, is starting like a little free library in your area or something where you're starting to give those books to the community as well. Because if you aren't finding them, I bet you there are other people that aren't finding them either.
That's true.
So that might be a way. And then, of course, libraries. I thought I just wrote libraries. They might have them.
Yeah.
I do feel like we forget about libraries sometimes.
It's true. One of my big goals in life actually is to like read as many of my unread books that I own as possible so that I can start like really freely using the library. Because like obviously I can do that now. I know that I can't do that, but I don't want to as much because I already know like, oh, I've got like the amount of books I have on my shelves to read will take me 2 years to read. at the very least. So it's like, okay, if I'm reading a bunch of books from the library, that's just going to extend that. And maybe that's fine. But for my brain, it's very stressful. So I really want to become a library person.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel like I have become more of a library person this year because of my e-reader. Like, I'm getting so many of the books that I read, even though they're books that I already own, but then I use the e-version from the library.
Yeah, that's nice.
Such a beautiful system. Hopefully we were able to help out a little bit, Maggie. We at least did think up a couple of sources that they can find, order some books from.
And I mean, I feel like other people listening will hopefully be excited about World of Books, which seems super cool, and I definitely want to try using too. Cool.
I want to look them up more for sure. Yeah. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a fun episode. I love doing these reading confession episodes. Currently, we have the submissions open to patrons only, just to kind of make sure we don't get super overwhelmed with the amount of voice messages sent. And so if you want to send a voice message, you could of course just become a patron for 1 month and then send it and then ditch, and that is totally allowed. So if you did have a pressing problem you really wanted to submit, you can do so. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been a lot of fun, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye.